If it's Monday, 6 months into his second term, new polls show President Trump's support sliding as he loses ground on key issues like the economy and immigration as he tries to turn the page on the Epstein saga. Plus, more than 100 people reportedly killed in back-to-back incidents at aid distribution sites in Gaza. Civilians shot while trying to collect desperately needed food as the hunger and humanitarian crisis worsens. And Harvard University clashes with the Trump administration in court, asking a federal judge to declare billions of dollars in cuts to their federal research funding unlawful in the latest case to test the limits of executive power. Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles. 6 months into his second term, the president is trying to focus attention to his administration's accomplishments and away from the controversy around the deceased convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The president this weekend touting his wins.
We achieved more in 6 months than almost any administration could accomplish in 8 years, and we're going to have a lot of good 6 months left. We're going to have a 6 and another 6 and another 6, so we'll keep going, and we're going to really do something I'm very proud of.
That, even as new polling shows the public's approval of Mr. Trump and his agenda is lagging. A CBS YouGov poll found that Mr. Trump's overall approval rating has fallen more than 10 points since February. And on the president's key issues, a CNN poll found the approval of the president's handling of immigration has dropped 19 points since March. That same CBS YouGov poll showing his handling of the inflation dropping 20 points. And additionally, on his signature piece of legislation, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, 47% say it will hurt their families, setting up a tough sell for Republicans in next year's midterm elections. It all comes as the president is trying to move past the anger from his base over his administration's handling of the Epstein case, which has dogged the White House since the DOJ announced 2 weeks ago that it would not release any more documents related to Epstein. Today, the White House press secretary pushing back on the suggestion that there's any division within the base.
He cited over the weekend some polls showing that his approval rating with the Republican Party is actually at an all-time high. He's polling 90 to 95% amongst Republicans right now. That's higher than any Republican president or any leader of this party ever. The president is the creator and the leader of the Make America Great Again movement. It's his baby that he made.
But still, polling shows that 75% are overall dissatisfied with how the administration has handled the case. That includes, of course, large majorities of Democrats and independents. But look at this Republican number. Nearly half of Republicans are unhappy as well. The president, who's remained largely out of the public eye these past few days, was very active on social media, seemingly trying to change the conversation away from Epstein, including suggesting that he might block the Washington Commanders' D.C. stadium deal unless the team changes its name back to one which was widely considered offensive to Native Americans, and posting an AI-generated video of former President Obama being arrested in the Oval Office, an apparent reference to new unsubstantiated claims from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, that the Obama administration, quote, manufactured intelligence to undermine President Trump's 2016 election win. Joining me to talk about all of this is our NBC News team, White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, and senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor has the latest from Capitol Hill. Vaughn, let's start with you. How significant is it that the president can't seem to make this controversy over Epstein go away, especially considering how much fallout there is from his own base?
Right. I think it's notable, Ryan, that this is somebody who does not typically make concessions, and that's what he has done by going and seeking the Department of Justice to go to the court to have the unsealing of the grand jury transcripts from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein indictments. Of course, Tom can get into the details of this. That is a far cry from actually calling for the unsealing of a great vast amount of other evidence that would maybe be more revealing of other associates of Jeffrey Epstein and any details that could relate to potentially President Trump himself here. At the same time, this is where the Wall Street Journal article that came out last week suggests that there is, well, not potentially criminal in nature, unflattering substance that could very well exist inside of the Epstein files. But that is where the president here is not, for now more than 2 weeks, been able to push this aside, because for years now, some of his most fervent supporters, one of their key rallying cries has been the idea of putting President Trump back into the White House so that he and his Department of Justice could reveal and unseal all of the Epstein files because of the very serious claims that they make. We know that Jeffrey Epstein, Ryan, had a vast number of victims in very serious cases that Jeffrey Epstein was directly involved in. At the same time, there is another bucket of conspiracy theories that supporters of the president believe that Jeffrey Epstein was a part of here. And so there's a lot to this. At the same time, the president is clearly not able to get this and push this aside.
And to that end, Vaughn, he appears to be frustrated, according to our reporting, that he's the one taking the heat over this instead of the Department of Justice. If this doesn't fade from the headlines soon, I mean, he's been very loyal to Pam Bondi. Could that change?
Right. We have not heard from Pam Bondi taking questions or being out front. It was the president that told his supporters to effectively move along. They've revealed everything that they need to reveal. At the same time, Pam Bondi is very clearly standing in line with the president himself and effectively following his desires in this. He had suggested about unsealing the grand jury transcripts, and that is what the Department of Justice is moving to do. And so in many ways here, the president is surrounded by entities that are looking to defend him. And so I think that for him, that is a very key element to all of this.
Okay, let's move over to Tom Winter. Vaughn, thank you for that. Tom, as we mentioned, the DOJ has a motion to unseal that grand jury transcript. What comes next? Is there any reason to think that the judge will grant that motion?
Well, I think so. I mean, the courts, particularly in the Southern District of New York and the appellate courts, have taken a look at this issue in a case going back to the 1990s, Ryan. And in the course of that, they looked at it and they established really kind of 9 considerations for a judge to think about in order to grant one of these requests, is to unseal something. This is something that's come up over the years with independent people, independent reporters, independent scholars, taking a look at specific individuals or cases and hoping to get more information, particularly when an individual was deceased. And that was the case with the precedent-controlling case that I'm referring to. And so one of the things that the judges and the courts have ruled out here is, or put out there rather, is whether or not federal prosecutors agree with and are moving for the records to be unsealed. And of course, that's exactly what's happening here in the letter from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. They're saying that they want the secrecy veil removed. And that's something that the courts overseeing this particular case and in this district has said that the judges should strongly consider. Also looking at the passage of time, whether or not any individuals are deceased or not. Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein, the man we're looking at next to me, is deceased, dead by suicide. And then also whether or not there's a consideration for other witnesses. The Justice Department's already said that they're willing to redact names of victims. So it appears, at least in the initial 4-page filing, that they've addressed some of the court's concerns. They're aware of the precedent. And so I don't think it's a remote possibility at all that some of these records could be unsealed. But newsflash, Ryan, we kind of know what they're already going to say, because it was the type of records, the transcripts, the testimony that came out to lead a grand jury to vote for the indictment of Jeffrey Epstein in the first place, and later Ghislaine Maxwell, who we're looking at on screen. And so the information contained within those indictments are things that we've well known, or in fact, in the case of Maxwell, have seen at a trial that led to her conviction. Mm-hmm. So as far as any additional parties here, Ryan, it's probably unlikely we're going to glean new information outside of those indictments. Okay,
so and this has been talked about a lot, that this is a pretty narrow request in terms of information, as you rightly point out. So is there any other route the government could take to get more information unsealed?
Well, certainly there have been a number of FOIAs filed over the years. There have been a number of news organizations, including this one, who have asked for documents in the past. The question becomes, given the size and scope of this investigation, it was voluminous, the number of U.S. Attorney's Office and FBI offices that looked at this, how far back are you willing to go, and how many 302s are you willing to, there's the report of an investigation, are you willing to put out there? And then the challenge, as our colleague and legal analyst Chuck Rosenberg wrote about and provided information to us about last week. The challenge on this is that a number of individuals' names are going to come up. For instance, I might say, well, in the course of this conduct, Tom, did you ever work with Ryan Nobles? Sure, I did. But does that mean that Ryan Nobles is somebody who's got a party to whatever case that I'm in or, in fact, is involved in any criminality whatsoever? No. So I think that's something that really federal prosecutors and the FBI have to consider here. And there's a lot of people that might not have really anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein, just that their name came up. They may be pulled into an orbit that could really be a challenge for the Justice Department and, as legal experts point out, inherently unfair, Ryan.
Yeah, there's a reason that the Department of Justice and prosecutors don't just make all this information public over the course of an investigation, and you rightly point that out. Tom, thank you for that. Let's go to Capitol Hill now, where Sahil's standing by. So, Sahil, there's been some question over whether there should be a vote on the Hill to push for the release of the Epstein files. Where does that stand?
Well, Ryan, there is an effort by a bipartisan duo, Tom Massey, the Republican, and Ro Khanna, the Democrat, to try to force this vote, to try to get around Speaker Johnson and House Republican leadership with this so-called discharge petition. This tactic rarely succeeds, but this issue has just struck a chord with the Republican base to such a significant degree that there are GOP Trump allies, hardcore MAGA members of the House who are interested in signing that discharge petition to force this issue because they do want more transparency and they do want the release of some files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Speaker Johnson, however, is determined to try to stop that. Take a listen to what he said.
My belief is we need the administration to have the space to do what it is doing, and if further congressional action is necessary or appropriate, then we'll look at that. But I don't think we're at that point right now because we agree with the president.
So no vote on this resolution before August.
Now, it may not ultimately be up to him, Ryan, but there is some time. This provision, this discharge petition has, there's a ripening period before it can move. Then it has to get signatures and then sit in committee for about 30 days. So the Speaker and the White House have some time to figure this out. But right now, they do still have a problem on their hands.
And this problem could extend into the midterms, right? We went over the poll numbers at the top of our segment. The president may not be running right now, but all of his colleagues in the House are, a good chunk of them in the Senate. When you see this general dissatisfaction by base voters, Republican voters, 49% saying they're dissatisfied with the way the administration is handling the Epstein case, could that be a blowback in the midterms? Could it lead to some of these base voters that they desperately need to just stay home?
It very plausibly could, Ryan. I can think of three distinct problems that the GOP is going to have in the 2026 midterms. The biggest one is that this party is heavily reliant on a coalition of voters who are not really Republican voters, they're Trump voters. They show up when he's on the ballot loyally and reliably. They do not show up on the ballot, they do not show up to vote when he isn't on the ballot, and he can never be on the ballot again. The second problem is Trump's approval has declined. You just showed the numbers, overall where his the approval rating is headed. It's on the downward. That includes with independents. So there is already that backlash environment. And finally, the so-called big, beautiful bill, which both parties agree is going to be the defining issue in the midterms, is deep underwater at this time. So you add all of those things together, and the Republicans are they need to be considering what the post-Trump future looks like, how they stitch together a coalition that can win elections when he can no longer be in the picture.
And then before you go, Sahil, do we expect Congress to pick up any threads from this Obama investigation, this release of information from DNI Tulsi Gabbard? Is this something that congressional Republicans in particular may want to seize on?
Unclear right now, Ryan. There hasn't been a huge clamoring to revisit the 2016 election at this time, but the House of Representatives is run by members who are staunch Trump allies. So if he makes enough noise about this, then you could see them going down this path. The issue is that this issue has been investigated many times before, and even prior investigations led by Republicans have confirmed the intelligence that Tulsi Gabbard is now calling a treasonous conspiracy by the Obama administration, confirmed that there was Russian meddling. There's a response that we've seen so far from the top Democrat on the committee, Jim Himes, who called DNI Gabbard's claims baseless, false, and a desperate attempt to change the topic, Ryan.
Yeah, and on the Democratic side, on the Senate side, the Vice Chairman, Democrat Mark Warner, saying she should be removed from that position. All right, Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Coming up, as desperation grows in Gaza over food shortages, the Hamas-run health ministry says at least 100 people were killed at an aid distribution site. We'll have an update from the ground in Israel. Plus, breaking news, the Trump administration just released new documents never before seen by the public, relating to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to the Mideast and what appears to be the Trump administration's increasing frustration with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The U.S. brokered ceasefire between Israel and Syria is holding for now. But according to a new report in Axios, last week Israeli strikes in Syria alarmed some in the White House, with one White House official saying, quote, Bibi acted like a madman. He bombs everything all the time. This could undermine what Trump is trying to do. This afternoon, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, tried to downplay the president's frustrations.
The president enjoys a good working relationship with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu and stays in frequent communication with him. He was caught off guard by the bombing in Syria and also the bombing of a Catholic church in Gaza, which, as you know, I addressed at my briefing last week. And in both accounts, the president quickly called the prime minister to rectify those situations.
Meanwhile, it was another deadly weekend in Gaza with two more incidents of Israeli troops opening fire at crowds gathering at aid distribution sites, including a convoy of UN World Food Program trucks. In a statement, the UN Secretary General said he was, quote, appalled by the accelerating breakdown of humanitarian conditions in Gaza. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley has more.
Well, just in the past couple of hours, Israel has expanded its operations in Deir al-Balah, which is in the central part of the Gaza Strip. They've issued an expansive evacuation order, joining onto other evacuation orders that looks as though it's putting tens of thousands of people back onto the move. Most of these people have been displaced many, many times before. Now, all of this comes a day after we saw one of, if not the deadliest incident involving the recent regime of aid distribution in the Gaza Strip, which has also attracted a great deal of controversy. Palestinian health officials in Gaza, which is ruled by Hamas, have said that around 100 people were killed when gunshots were fired at a United Nations aid distribution site yesterday. The previous day before that, it was at a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site, one of only 4 operated by that U.S. and Israeli-backed organization. So the situation is dire in the Gaza Strip after having suffered from all of those weeks and months of blockades. Now it looks as though people are putting their lives in their hands, trying to save their lives.
Matt Bradley, thank you for that report. Joining me now on set is NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube. I think it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around just how bleak things are in Gaza. This is a humanitarian crisis. There's also a question of where these people could go. You had some reporting earlier this year about potential efforts to move Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. What can you tell us? Where do things stand with that planning?
Yeah, and Trump administration officials have also told us that this is something that the president has been prioritizing. He wants to try to move Palestinians out of Gaza into other countries. The big question is where. One of the countries that we learned about several months ago was Libya, and that seems to be still very much in play right now, Ryan. The possibility of voluntarily moving Palestinians from Gaza to Libya, but that's not without difficulty. There's the logistics of getting them there, for starters. There's also, where do you put them? There's a housing shortage in Libya already. And then how do you necessarily convince them to leave? This is their homeland. Much of the Palestinians see themselves as very connected to that strip of land, to the Gaza Strip, and it may be difficult to get them out of there. But the reality is, as we've just been seeing by that reporting by Matt, our colleague Matt, the situation there is so dire that it's possible that maybe some will decide to leave with some of the incentives that the Trump administration and other countries are talking about.
It would be hard to imagine, though, that would solve all the problems. What do these people do for work? How are they fed? All those things along those lines. But if the Trump administration or Israel combined to work out a plan like this, is this something that the other Arab nations would just go along with? Would they be okay with it?
So the voluntary part would be a big part of it. If any kind of a forced relocation would be met with a ton of resistance throughout not just the region, but really throughout many countries in the world. Voluntary would be a little bit more plausible, but I think the concern is if you're moving a large population of people to a neighboring country, that could cause destabilization. Everything you just said, housing, additional food, jobs, all of those things could cause the possibility. So even if you're talking about a place like Libya, that's been, under more than a decade now, almost 2 decades of war, how do you move people in there to a place that already is still in conflict and is still facing problems with housing and food shortages and jobs? Those are the concerns that many Arab partners and Arab nations have in the region.
And I mean, there isn't an airport there. I mean, you've already talked about the logistics of this. I mean, how would you even, are they even discussing how you'd get this many people? Would you do it by boat, by train? How would it happen?
The officials we spoke with are considering every option. So by boat, by train, by car, which would, not be a short journey, and then by air. But as you mentioned, there's no airstrip there. So everything about this would be a logistics hurdle. But this is something that not only Trump administration officials, but those outside the government have been working on now for months. And, it looks as if they're still working through it. And Libya still remains one of the real options. They're looking at other places, too, North Africa, other countries in the area.
And you use the word voluntary, and obviously that's got to be a big part of it. But even under a voluntary circumstance, couldn't there be a level of coercion in trying to get people from one place to another?
Absolutely. And you can even look at the situation right now, just with what's happening with this violence, with the terrible, food shortages, medical shortages, everything, the basic necessities these people are facing. Well, as part of that, an effort to just try to push them out, you could even look at it that way. That's going to be, if in fact they start moving Palestinians out of Gaza, it's going to be hugely controversial, and it's going to be extremely expensive, and it's going to be a logistic hurdle, and it's something that, if in fact they move people out to places like Libya, the world will watch for years to see exactly how it changes that country and changes the region.
Okay, Courtney, thank you for staying on top of it. We appreciate it. And we are now following some breaking news. The Trump administration has just released thousands of FBI records on Martin Luther King Jr. The documents inside include details about how the FBI's investigation into King's assassination, and the release comes despite opposition from the civil rights leader's family. NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley joins me now with more on this breaking news. So, Ryan, I guess the big question is, why now?
Well, this was something that Donald Trump had ordered, but, there was that famous video of that Fox News interview that Donald Trump did where he was talking about what he would order declassified, and talking about the JFK files, the MLK files, and then the Epstein files. And the Epstein files was the one he sort of held back on there. And that's, of course, what is really dominating the news, or at least was as of a couple days ago. And this, the timing of this, I think certainly raises, a few eyebrows. Obviously, this is something that had been in the works for a while, so the exact timing, but combined with a number of other stories that we saw today, along with some of Donald Trump's posts from overnight, it seems as though changing the topic from Epstein seems to be a major focus here for sure, Ryan.
And this is not something the King family is in favor of. They voiced their opposition to this release. Why don't they want this information out there?
Well, there are definitely, it's a lot of personal information that would be coming out. They did have a statement from a conservative member of Dr. King's family who was sort of supporting this in the press release that they put out in connection with this. And you had a mention from Pam Bondi praising Dr. King as, a great American. So there are definitely questions about how much information is in regard to his personal life should be, put out in the public there. So that's but a lot of this has to do with, and it could, fuel conspiracy theories. But a lot of this has to do with the chase and the sort of hunt for his assassin. So I think that's, but obviously this is an enormous amount of documents, so it's going to take a long time for people to actually go through them and see if there's anything really new that comes along over the course of what came out here, Ryan.
And could there be information released that could potentially be seen as damaging to Dr. King or his legacy?
I think it remains to be seen, right? Because we have so much material that still has to be gone through and put in the context of what was already known. Obviously there are some great biographies out there about Dr. King that look, including a trilogy that looks over the course of his life. So this is something that has been closely studied. Some files have come out before, but I think this mostly is going to be focused on the assassination, but it remains to be seen, I think, what exactly is going to be in these hundreds of thousands of pages of documents.
Okay, Ryan Riley, thank you for updating us on that breaking news. Up next, the Trump administration faces off with Harvard University in court over the government's attempt to freeze billions of dollars in federal funding to the university. Plus, it's sentencing day for one of the ex-cops who opened fire into Breonna Taylor's home in 2020, as the Justice Department is asking for him to serve just 1 day of jail time. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We could get a decision at any time now from the federal judge who heard arguments today in Harvard University's lawsuit against the Trump administration over billions of dollars in cuts to their federal research funding. Both sides have asked for a summary judgment, which will allow for the Obama-appointed judge to issue a decision without a trial. But President Trump is already lashing out at the judge on social media, calling her a, quote, total disaster and vowing that when she rules against us, we will immediately appeal and win. The case is part of the Trump administration's ongoing feud with Harvard over what the White House says is the school's failure to address anti-Semitism on campus. NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach joins me now. So the judge in this case, Judge Burroughs, did she give any indication of how she'll rule?
Well, she called the matter mind-boggling during the hearing today, so that gives some indication. But one of her big points that she was making was the Trump administration is calling Harvard anti-Semitic. But she wanted to know who. Is it the researchers? Or is it the professors? Is it the university president? The lawsuit doesn't make that clear. Now, Harvard has been very clear in the fact that, yes, there have been isolated incidents of anti-Semitism on campus, and they have taken measures to address those issues, but does not require $2 billion in funding to be lost from the university.
How soon could we expect the decision?
So it's going to happen by September. So we have certainly a long runway here. This was avoiding a trial, which would have been lengthy and expensive for both the government and for Harvard. So this summary judgment will be lengthy in terms of how long the actual opinion is going to be, probably 80, 90 pages, and it will take some time to come out in the next few weeks.
So even though it's a summary judgment, the administration or Harvard could still appeal that decision?
Absolutely, and we would expect the administration, as Donald Trump said today, to appeal that decision should it not go his way.
Okay, so what's the status right now, though, of federal funding in general at Harvard?
So as of May 1st, there is a loss of $2.2 billion in federal funding towards grants and $60 million in federal funding loss as it relates to year-by-year contracts. We're talking everything from cancer research to infectious disease research to neurological research to technology upgrades. All of that is really not just impacting Harvard, but it's impacting a large swath of this country, because we're talking universities that work with Harvard, businesses around the Boston area that benefit from the grants that are part of the Harvard research facilities, and it hits other universities as well. So it's a significant deal here.
Yeah, and maybe expand on that too, because I would imagine there are universities all across the country that are watching this closely. How could the outcome of this case impact all these other universities that could find themselves in a similar confrontation?
And so many have, as we've seen on the immigration front as well. But basically, the Trump administration is saying here, do exactly what we want. We're going to micromanage your university, or you're going to lose billions of dollars in funding. If you're another university, a huge research facility like UVA or otherwise, that is going to be a significant issue should an issue come up on your campus.
Okay, Gary Grumbach, thank you for that. We appreciate it. We are also awaiting the official sentencing of a former Louisville police officer convicted in connection with the killing of Breonna Taylor. We're following the developments from inside the courtroom as that hearing for Brett Hankinson is underway right now. The decision comes as the Justice Department recommended that Hankinson be sentenced to just 1 day in prison after being convicted of violating Taylor's civil rights when he fired 10 shots into her apartment during a botched raid in March of 2020. Now, none of his bullets struck Taylor, who was killed when she was struck by shots fired by other officers. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster is with me now. So explain to me, Shaq, what was the Justice Department's reasoning for recommending such a light sentence?
Yeah, you know, they had a sentencing memo that they released last week, and in that memo, they said while they respect the decision of the jury that convicted this officer back in November, they really questioned whether he should have been charged with this constitutional violation in the first place, saying they reviewed everything and that there's no real parallel in any other prosecution against an officer who didn't strike any victim. They also said in that statement that they're not clear, that there's no sense that him being in prison would protect members of the public or protect the public from this defendant. And interestingly, Ryan, they also referenced Derek Chauvin, who is serving a 30-plus year sentence for the murder of George Floyd. They said that he was attacked in prison and talked a little bit about that and said that Hankinson could face that same kind of situation if he did get the sentence that is recommended or at least advised on by the Sentencing Commission, which, by the way, is about 11 to 14 years behind bars and not the 1 day and 3 years of supervised release that the Department of Justice is recommending.
So this is ultimately the judge's decision. How have they responded to the recommendation?
Yes, it's the judge's decision. The judge has a lot of discretion here. It's a Trump appointee, someone who was appointed back in 2017, and who has been on the bench since 2018. This is all happening behind closed doors, Ryan. There are no cameras in court. It's our sense that the reporters in the courtroom either had to turn off their devices or hand over their devices. So we haven't had any update, and this is a hearing that started at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time and have not gotten any information from the reporters in the room. I'll tell you, I did speak to the family attorney just before that hearing started, and we do know that Breonna Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, was slated to give a victim impact statement. We do also know from motions before the hearing that the defense was also going to recommend and ask the judge for a lower sentence than that advisory amount of time from the probation office. But what's happening right now, what's been happening for the past couple of hours, Ryan, we just don't know.
That's wild. Let's say the sentence is more than what the DOJ recommended. Couldn't they or President Trump just vacate or dismiss Hankinson's conviction?
They could. We've seen this before with President Trump, not shy about using his pardon power, not shy about using his ability to commute or reduce someone's sentence. All of that could be on the table in just terms of the powers that the president has. I actually brought that up. I asked the family attorney about that. They said that's something they're aware of. But look, for this family that's been dealing with this, that has been grieving publicly for the past 5 years, since March of 2020 when Breonna Taylor was killed in that botched raid, this could be a sense of closure, and the idea that you're ending the trial, you're ending this process with this sentence. But that is definitely something that they said they're aware of, they're thinking about, and they hope to not have to face, Ryan.
Okay, Shek, stand by for us. If you do get news out of that courtroom, please let us know. We'll put you back on with that report. Shek, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And before we go to break, we do have some sad news from the world of entertainment. Actor Malcolm Jamal-Warner has died in a drowning accident while on vacation in Costa Rica, according to authorities. Warner played Theo Huxtable, the son of Bill Cosby's character, Dr. Cliff Huxtable, on The Cosby Show from 1984 until the show's end in 1992. Warner later reflected on the show's legacy in light of the sexual assault allegations against Cosby, telling People magazine, quote, "I'm still proud of the legacy and having been part of such an iconic show that had such a profound impact on, first and foremost, black culture, but also American culture." In addition to the role of Theo Huxtable, Malcolm Jamal Warner acted in numerous other TV shows and was a Grammy award-winning musician. He was just 54 years old. Welcome back. 1 year ago today, the 2024 presidential campaign was turned upside down. It seems like a lot more than a year. When President Biden announced that he was ending his re-election bid and endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris after weeks of questions and speculations following his disastrous performance in his June debate with President Trump. Harris, of course, went on to lose to President Trump. Now the Democratic Party is conducting an after-action report on why they fell short in November. But according to the New York Times, that audit is not expected to address President Biden's decision to run in the first place, the timing of his decision to drop out, or key decisions made by the Harris campaign. That's according to 6 people briefed on the report's progress. Quote, party officials describe the draft document as focusing on the 2024 election as a whole, but not the presidential campaign, which is something like eating at a steakhouse and then reviewing the salad. Joining me on set is Rhonda Colvin. She's a senior congressional reporter at The Washington Post. Anthony Coley, former Justice Department spokesman under President Biden and an NBC News contributor. And Rob Louie, the president and executive editor of the Daily Signal. So, Rhonda, I mean, it's hard not to roll your eyes when you see that the Democratic Party is going to conduct an audit that doesn't address kind of all the big things that we all have questions about. Why Biden stayed in so long, how the Harris campaign ran itself, and the decision to drop itself out. Is this a serious accounting of what went wrong?
You know, I guess we'll have to leave it up to the Democrats and their voters to decide if it's serious and warranted for a time like this. But what I keep thinking of is that, you know, on one hand, Trump is such an unconventional candidate, right? People even drop from his own party if they can't run against his brand of, or run with his brand of politics. So in order to audit what went wrong with the Democrats, it seems like
something that just can't possibly really be done in a satisfactory way. So there's that on the one hand. But on the other hand, you think, given the fact that, as you said, a year ago, the former President Biden decides to drop out, you had another candidate who you might want to look at that campaign to see what happened along the timeline of why she did not carry it through, because she was well-funded around this time last year. So it seems like that would serve Democrats better if they did look at what they can understand, but also understanding that Trump is so unconventional, it's sort of hard to decide what went wrong.
Right. So, Anthony, maybe the Democratic Party doesn't want to answer some of these tough questions, but the president's son does. Listen to what Hunter Biden has to say about that period of time.
I know exactly what happened in that debate. He flew around the world, basically, the mileage that he could have flown around the world 3 times. Yeah. He's 81 years old. He's tired as They give him Ambien to be able to sleep. He gets up on the stage, and he looks like he's a deer in the headlights.
I kind of feel like that's what people were concerned about, that he was 81 years old and he was as tired as he said. I mean,
so
is that...
A lot of things can be true here. So he was 81 years old, and he did take 2 trips back and forth from Europe. I give him that. That's not why he lost the race, though, right? You can have the best message in the world. You can have the best policy agenda in the world. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a trusted messenger, somebody that voters think can go the distance, somebody who has stamina, then you're going to lose. And that's what happened on the presidential level in 2024. And I think what Hunter Biden didn't say is that people started losing confidence in Joe Biden, whom I love, who I work for in his administration, right after the Afghanistan debacle. Do you remember that? It was August of 2022. Like, his polling never recovered after Afghanistan. And people voted for Biden, right, because of competence, in part because of competence. And so the midterms, I think, gave the Biden team a little more confidence than they should have had, but that was the moment where he really should have bowed out, and we should have had a robust primary process.
But let's get back to Hunter Biden, Rob. I have to imagine a conservative sees him talking and talking the way he's talking and thinking this is like manna from heaven. Like, why has he re-entered this conversation? Democrats have to be part of them want to say, just go away, right?
Sure, absolutely. And you're seeing conservatives, including Speaker Johnson and others, really taking advantage of today's anniversary of Biden dropping out and putting out videos and saying, look at what Democrats hid from the American people over the course of the years that he was president. But Ryan, going back to what Hunter Biden said and what the Democrats are doing with their audit, I think it ultimately comes down, the American people were facing an affordability crisis during Biden's presidency. The cost of living had gone up. They couldn't afford gas, groceries, and rent. These were the things that they were voting on. And this is, I think, why they rejected Biden and the policies that his administration was pursuing. They went on a spending spree in Washington, D.C. that led to historic levels of inflation in this country. And they said, we want to put in place somebody like Donald Trump, who we think can bring back some common sense. And that's ultimately, I think, what Republicans will be judged on in next year's midterm.
Okay, so let's make that point, because that, I think, is what the administration would want the perception to be of what's happening in the White House right now. But you take a look at what Republicans are doing. Every chance they get, they're trying to bring up the past, right? They are talking about Joe Biden. They're investigating his use of an auto pen. They're now talking about Hillary Clinton's emails again with a release from the Judiciary Committee. Do voters really care about Joe Biden? Do they care about this release that Tulsi Gabbard has had about another investigation of the Russia investigation? Is that what voters care about? Especially when you talk about the reason they won in 2020 was that focus on these kitchen table issues.
I think Republicans do care about holding those accountable who may have taken actions that they deem were never really punished for those particular things. But I do think that at the end of the day, yes, I mean, when you're casting a vote for somebody, you're probably not looking backward. You're looking to the future, and you're looking to see, who am I going to be better off? Are my personal finances going to be better under a Republican or a Democrat? And as we see from polling, Democrats are not performing particularly well in the generic ballot right now compared to previous midterm cycles. And so I ultimately think that Republicans need to get out there and sell what's in the one big beautiful bill. And if they're not effective at doing that, then they will be in some trouble.
The other thing they care about is politicians keeping their word. And Donald Trump, particularly with regard to Jeffrey Epstein, is not keeping his word to his base. And I think we're seeing this time and again, not just on matters like Jeffrey Epstein, but on immigration, reform, right? The president would have this country believe that the borders are being invaded by criminal, illegal aliens that are terrorizing American cities. When the fact of the matter is, to his credit, border crossings are down, but deportations are even tracking behind Barack Obama, and violent crime in this country is at historic lows. In Baltimore, in Chicago, you name it, violent crime is down, and that's the trend that started under the previous administration.
But Rana, let's talk about immigration. We'll talk about polling since Rob brought it up. Immigration has historically been one of President Trump's strongest polling numbers. But look at what the CNN poll out yesterday says about where things stand on immigration. His net approval rating on immigration in March of 2025 was +3. It's now -16 in July of 2025. President Biden had a similar cratering of his numbers as it related to the immigration. They tried to change course. They tried to pass that bipartisan bill that Republicans stymied. Is there any chance that President Trump's going to change his strategy as it relates to immigration when he sees numbers like these?
It doesn't appear that he will. I mean, if history is any indication, he won't really change course. He might even heighten it a little bit. I think what we're seeing still is if you watch the campaign, you saw President Trump really always throw the greatest hits to his supporters. I remember being at the RNC and there were signs that said mass deportation now. That's his supporter base. They energized that through the campaign. They're still trying to energize it, even though they have it, but they're not trying to expand their message to other Americans, specifically independents or people who might lean a little right. They are continuing to go after the tried and true MAGA base. And I think those are the people who are supporting the mass deportations, but you have the rest of the country being very uncomfortable with some of the videos that we're seeing. The Abrego Garcia case has certainly gotten a lot of interest and sympathy. So, there is one way of being, campaign Trump, where he was kind of throwing this at his base, but, can you govern like that and expect to set your party up for success?
Campaign Trump told us that he was going to focus on violent criminal immigrants first. That's not what he's doing. We see time and time again hundreds, thousands of undocumented immigrants who are working in restaurants, who are farm laborers, who have been caught up with little or no due process. And that, I think, is why these numbers are falling like they're
So, Rob, let's put up some of these numbers from the CNN poll on specific issues that Trump has pointed to. Increasing the ICE budget, that is underwater 22 points. Ending birthright citizenship, underwater by 31 points. Building new detention facilities, Alligator Alcatraz, under 31%. Is this the message that Trump was selling to folks during the campaign? Is it resonating with the American people in the way that he'd hoped?
Well, I think that we have to look at the results. I mean, as you pointed out, the border is largely secure as a result of the policies he's come in. And frankly, it could have been that way for 4 years of Joe Biden had he not undone on his first day a lot of the things that Donald Trump had put in place in his first term. When it comes to those specific issues, I think we need to see how things play out from the provisions that were in the One Big Beautiful Bill. A lot of those things were things that Tom Homan was asking for because ICE needed the facilities to properly hold people in order to deport them. And yes, I do agree with you, Rhonda. This is a central issue for the Republican base. They want to make sure that Donald Trump follows through on the promises when it comes to making sure that illegal immigration is at the lowest level that it can be possible.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Rhonda, Anthony, Rob, thank you all for being here. Still to come, the reality behind President Trump's vow to, quote, save the Afghan refugees facing deportation from UAE. An expert on the mission to resettle Afghan refugees in the United States joins me next with some critical insight. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As the Trump administration continues to roll back foreign aid programs, President Trump signaled in a post on social media yesterday that he will step in and help resettle Afghan refugees in the UAE who fled their country after the chaotic U.S. withdrawal and then the subsequent return to Taliban rule. President Trump posted, "I will try to save them, starting right now." He included a link to a report that the UAE was preparing to turn over those refugees to the Taliban. It comes as the State Department is still dealing with this month's mass layoffs, which include cuts to the Office of Facilitating the Resettlement of Afghan Nationals who worked alongside the U.S. military. Joining me now is Sean Van Diver, president and founder of Afghan Evac, a coalition of organizations helping to resettle Afghan refugees here in the United States. Sean, thanks so much for being here. Let's start specifically with these Afghan refugees in the UAE that the president was talking about. Have you been in contact with the administration about resettling the group? And what are you hearing about the steps the president is trying to make sure these refugees aren't turned over to the Taliban?
Sure, Ryan, thanks so much for having me today. Look, the truth is that there's a few folks left there. What we haven't heard is how they got there, right? There were 17,000 Afghans that got brought to the UAE by private citizens who, in the aftermath of the withdrawal, were doing what they could to help. The UAE graciously set up a program with one of those private citizens, brought these folks there, and the State Department, after our urging, we pulled them to the table. They were able to get most of the people out. There's a few left, and for a variety of reasons, they couldn't process. What shouldn't happen is they should not be sent back to the Taliban. They should either come here or be sent somewhere where they're safe and they're able to go on with their lives. They've been stuck in limbo for 3 years, Ryan, and it's really awful.
Yeah, so let's turn now to the layoffs at the State Department. It included cuts to the leadership team of the Office of Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, often known as CARE. What impact has that had on your organization and its ability to do its work? And what message does that send to our Afghan partners?
Sure. So a couple things there, right? One, Afghan Evac helped build CARE. We, in the aftermath of the withdrawal, were part of the large swath of people that stood up. We sort of convened everybody. We helped build CARE. CARE served not just the various third country locations where we would fly Afghans from Kabul to those third country locations and then move them onto the United States after successful processing. There were hundreds of people that worked at CARE dedicating their lives to this mission. And this administration just wiped them all away. They fired one woman who gave birth 12 hours before. It's just absolutely unconscionable. And look, even the folks that are stuck at UAE, they were being served by CARE. So we're hopeful that with the president's tweet this weekend, that we're going to see a renewed commitment to making sure that the 40 or so Afghans that are still in the UAE make it to safety, the 1,500 Afghans that are still in Doha, Qatar, Camp Asaliya, make it to safety. Among those are active duty military families, female tactical platoon members, special immigrant visa holders, a variety of folks who stood up for the idea of America and are now at risk because of their relationship to us. So we hope that the president will not just help the few Afghans that are in UAE, he'll help all of these folks, up to 260,000 or so around the world who fought for us.
Yeah, and when you talk to these refugees that are still stuck in the pipeline, there must be such a degree of uncertainty. What do they say to you? What are they most worried about?
Well, it's just that, right? It's the uncertainty that looms over them. They just want to know what is coming for them. When President Trump shut down Enduring Welcome, the safest, most secure legal immigration program that our country's ever seen, on January 20th, it caused a lot of chaos and disruption. We've seen reception and placement, so special immigrant visa holders, when they arrive here, can get help to restart their lives. But that was off for a long time. And refugees can't move at all. And there are about 60,000 folks in the refugee pipeline who are every bit as deserving as special immigrant visa holders, of which there are about 167,000 remaining to come. There are 32,000 SIVs with principal applicant SIVs, but there's only 9,000 principal applicant visas remaining. So Congress has a lot left to do. And the administration could just start moving this. President Trump could solve it today by telling Stephen Miller to get out of the way and stop breaking promises to our veterans.
Back in May, DHS announced that it was ending temporary protected status for Afghanistan. The issue is still tied up in the courts. But in their statement, DHS said at the time, the secretary determined that overall there are notable improvements in the security and economic situation such that requiring the return of Afghan nationals to Afghanistan does not pose a threat to their personal safety due to the ongoing armed conflict or extraordinary and temporary conditions. Is that true? Is that your sense of what the situation is like in Afghanistan? What is the reality of Taliban rule there now?
No, the reality is that people are dying, that women can barely exist there. They can't go to school. They can't go to work. They can't even be seen through the windows in their own home. They have to draw the shades. The reality is that they're hunting down and arresting people who are connected to our mission. Kristi Noem is so far off base on this. It is just like any person with a brain and eyes can see that it's not safe in Afghanistan. And I would encourage the secretary, if she believes it to be so safe, that she take her family there on a nice vacation without security detail.
Okay. Sean Van Diver, thank you so much for your expertise and your work on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. But as always, the news continues to roll on. Hallie Jackson is standing by right now with Hallie Jackson Now on NBC News Now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.